There's no music if you have no body to play it with, so take care of your body first.
You getting into the gym and you lifting weights and working on muscles it's physical therapy for the benefit of your playing.
The truth is, nothing works like just taking care of the simple stuff. Diet, exercise, and sleep. Take care of that and you'll be fine.
Join us as two musicians and fitness coaches discuss strength, wellness, and fitness in relation to musicians, artists, and performance.
Welcome back to the Tuned and Strong podcast. This over here is Angela McCuiston.
And this
Music Strong. I'm having a day. I'm sorry.
And this is Dr. Jen from Tuned and Toned Performance. And we are joined today by a very special guest, Duncan Rock, who is a nutritionist and also a operatic baritone. Did I get that correct?
Perfect. Yes, absolutely.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because we have not had a nutritionist, let alone, we've had a couple of people in the operatic arena, but no nutritionist. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your background and how you got into this whole space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Australian raised. I grew up in a place called Perth, Western Australia, famously the most isolated major city in the world. So everyone in the world thinks Australia is the edge of the universe, and everyone in Australia thinks Perth is the edge of the universe. So the edge of the universe. But wonderful place to grow up. I grew up, by the beach, playing sport, having a good time. When I was in my early 20s, I won a scholarship to come to London and study music at a school called the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, which I gauge from your facial expression that you know.
I do.
Did you study there?
I did not, but I know of it, and I've had several colleagues study there.
Okay, wonderful school. I had a wonderful 3 years there, living as a student in London and learning about opera. I was in what they call the opera school there. And then graduated in 2000 and sort of had a sort of decade or so as an operatic baritone, singing a lot here in the UK and in Europe, and I've sung over in the States in a few of the houses there. And yeah, it's been a wonderful life as a sort of traveling operatic baritone. How the nutrition sort of fits into that equation is, I have a lifelong relationship and love for health, fitness, mainly sort of in a narcissistic, selfish level. I've always just enjoyed sport and fitness and all of that. But a few years ago, I was at the end of another year of sort of traveling 8 months of the year. And, I was starting to get a little older, and my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were talking about getting married, starting a family. And I saw a future conflict that I'd like to avoid. Not a conflict with my wife, just a conflict with what I knew I would want from my life and the life I was currently living. Even though I was really enjoying it at the time, I knew there would be a bit of a conflict there, sort of internal conflict. So I was considering, I remember, I was in Australia at the Opera Queensland singing the title role in the opera Don Giovanni. And I was looking at ways that I might be able to travel less, which sort of meant singing less. So I was looking at, maybe there's something else I could do in collaboration or in concert. And I was thinking of things to do, and I knew I had this love of human biology, physiology, health, fitness, preventative healthcare. And I sort of came across this idea of studying nutrition. And I found sort of officially, because I read every nutrition book and I listened to nutrition podcasts, and I was, very much on top of it. But to study it officially, learn how to read peer-reviewed research and, learn the science of it. And I found a master's degree at Deakin University in Melbourne that would allow me to study majority remotely while I was sort of jumping from New York to London to Madrid, wherever I happened to be at the time. So I applied and I did some exams to be able to get in, and got some people to write some nice letters about me and things like that, and it got accepted. And then slowly over the course of about 2 years, completed this master's degree in nutritional science, in human nutrition, and started practicing. And the hope would be that I would be able to sing less, rather than traveling 8 months of the year. Maybe I'd travel 2, 3, 4 months of the year, something more manageable. And started practicing a little bit, just privately, seeing a few people. Mainly started with friends of friends, and then word of mouth, you get more clients. And I thought I was very, very clever, and I was very pleased with myself. And I was in New York singing at the Metropolitan Opera, February and March of 2020. And you may recall in March 2020, something fairly significant happened. A little virus decided to make its way through the
I thought you were going to say
population.
our podcast started, but that's
and of course, second most important.
Same time frame. You were at the Met. We met for the first and only time.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so everything sort of collapsed, in a sense, in many aspects. And I had 2 years of cancellations of work, because in the opera world, we sort of we book quite far in advance. You might sign a contract for 3-4 years in the future. So I lost a substantial amount of work. And also in July that year, I became a father. My daughter was born, which is obviously wonderful, but
congratulations.
Thank you. Obviously 99% wonderful, but a little scary having a baby in the middle of a pandemic when you don't know what the future is going to look like. So trying to be positive, trying to, do something good with this experience, I ramped up the nutrition stuff rather than it being like a little side thing that I was just doing for interest, to try and help some people, maybe make a bit of money. It became something I really invested a bit more time in, working with more people. I started giving a few seminars and things like that. And sorry, I feel like this is the longest answer ever. Is this? Am I giving you too much detail?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Wonderful. I was approached by a wonderful now colleague and friend of mine, a guy called Stephen King, who is the owner and founder of the London Voice Care Centre. And he approached me saying he has this multidisciplinary clinic in London where they do vocal massage, they have osteopathy, they have speech pathology, performance psychology, obviously vocal lessons and so forth. And we have an ENT that we work with. And he said, look, I want a nutritionist on my team, but I want someone who understands singers and voices. And as far as I know, you're the only one doing both at a certain level. And I said, okay. And to be honest, when I was asked, I was apprehensive because my initial thought was I wanted to keep the worlds separate. I wanted to have my singing life and then my nutrition work separate. I wasn't trying to be a nutritionist for singers or for musicians. I just loved that world. And I wasn't working with specifically with performers. In fact, the performers I were working for, in air quotes, were athletes, sports people. But, so I thought about it for a while, but to be honest, they convinced me at the Voice Care Centre by showing me case studies of people they had worked with and people who walked in with complete vocal dysphonia, unable to speak, unable to phonate, and they walk out a few months later singing, either happy and enjoying their hobby, or able to earn money again, able to work again. We work with obviously some opera singers, a lot of singers, West End performers, TV presenters, radio presenters, anyone for whom their voice is their livelihood. And then also some people for whom their voice isn't what they're being sort of paid for, but it's an essential facet of their job, school teachers and the like. And so that's how the world sort of collided. I started becoming specifically a nutritionist for vocal performers. So I started the work there kind of this time, 2 years ago, 2020. So I've been doing that for about 2 years and have since sort of given more specialized seminars in nutrition for performers at English National Opera and University of Chichester, various places. And I'm now working with the Marola young artists, the Adler young artists at the San Francisco Opera on a regular basis on health and nutrition for their young artists. So that's the longest answer ever, maybe, to that question.
It's brilliant.
Not at all.
You shouldn't ask opera singers to talk about themselves. We relish the opportunity. I apologize.
We're okay with that.
Yeah, this is something that we haven't heard yet. So it's and besides that, it's just interesting in general.
I had seen you were doing something with the San Francisco Opera, but I wasn't sure exactly what. So I was curious on how you got into that and what exactly, what do you do? How does nutrition play into vocalization? How does it affect you as a musician? And I know I've had other people talk to me about, things like dry mouth and other things like that. And I know one other nutritionist, but it's not a really big profession. We just don't hear about this enough. So I feel like there is a huge chasm that you could probably bridge this gap for us.
Sure. Oh gosh. Well, I hope not to let you down.
No pressure
though. Yeah, no pressure. It really varies inter individual. It's everything we do, particularly at the clinic at the Voice Care Center, is very patient centered. So we don't sort of have a prescription that this is what we do for X. It's like, what does this human need? This complete human with entirely wrapped up in not just a pathology or a dysfunction, but a personality and needs and wants and desires. And I like that. And the sort of the biopsychosocial model of patient care is sort of the focus. And I try to bring that into my other work that I do privately. But, for example, with the team at San Francisco, I've given a sort of base group of seminars for all of the artists. I first gave it to the Marola young artists, which is the summer school. There's sort of, I think, 25 or 30 of them. And now I've given similar workshop seminars to the young artists, the Adler Fellows. But I guess first and foremost, singers are people too. So all of the benefits, believe it or not, so all of the benefits that map onto good nutrition and that then map onto human physiology and functioning, obviously map onto singers and their bodies. So longevity, optimal energy, improving your sleep, dealing with jet lag, improving your immune functioning, improving athletic performance, cardiovascular fitness, all that kind of stuff that nutrition can be a key element in improving. Obviously, singers can benefit from those just as human beings. But then, of course, there are some issues that map specifically onto singers or vocal artists, vocal performers that tend to come up with some frequency. Things like immune health, things like optimal hydration, things like reflux, things like dealing with jet lag, all that type of stuff. How to eat healthily on the road, how to eat healthy when you're jumping from country to country to country, things like that, which are sort of staples in questions that I get asked by performing artists, by singers. And then occasionally there's some, one could say, more serious, more specific cases. A recent client at the Voice Care Center was dealing with a very young singer who was dealing with throat cancer and needed a low iodine diet sort of prescription because she was having radioactive iodine isotope treatment. Mm-hmm. So formulating that diet to aid in her recovery, but also to aid her treatment. Things like that, which become quite a lot more specific and detailed. The occasional sort of case study of that kind.
Can I stop and ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
So this might be outside your scope, and if it is, let me know. But with this particular person that you're talking about, we're talking about, you said throat cancer. Does that have anything to do with the thyroid or no?
I don't think it did in her case.
Okay.
No, my involvement was basically, obviously she'd had serious illness and very wonderful surgical, which was very, very successful, which is great. But, a certain amount of healing, physiological healing that could be aided by optimal nutrition. And then this added element, it was a sort of double difficulty because this, without giving too much away, of course, this person needed to have a low iodine diet, but was also a vegetarian. And a lot of vegetarian sources of protein, which of course you do need a good stream of amino acids, particularly when you're healing from injury or from surgery. A lot of high protein vegetarian sources are also high in iodine. So, a bit of a jigsaw puzzle kind of fitting around that. But it was successful, and she's doing well. So
excellent. Okay. So I wanted to ask about that because I'm hypothyroid myself, and I have had doctors tell me you need to supplement with iodine, and then no, you don't, and then yes, you do, and then I'm back and forth, and so it just kind of depends on things. And so I know that they can play well with each other, and sometimes they're not related at all. So I'm just curious on that, but please do continue.
Thyroid, to my knowledge, it can be a tricky one. It once again, it tends to be quite high into individual variance in how things interact with each other. How are you doing? Okay, managing it? Is it?
So fun story. My thyroid died when I was 27, and when I say died, I mean like my body ate half of it, so it doesn't work. So I had this is an interesting thing. My blood pressure was running very low. My good cholesterol was highly elevated. So we're talking like blood pressure of like 80/50. Very low. Very low. And I was exercising every day. So I was in great shape, but I was gaining weight. My hair was falling out. I was cold, all those kinds of things. And I went to see an osteopath because I thought he'd be great. And he said, well, everything is within level. I think you have low blood pressure. And I'm like, you're an idiot. You're fired. Give me my blood work. Like, are you serious? I'm not stupid. I looked at my blood work while you were doing whatever you did for the last half hour where you made me sit in this room. All my blood work was at the bottom of the level. Yeah, I'm within range, but it's at the very bottom, every single one of these, but yet I'm within range. And so my blood pressure is low. So I went to find a doctor, and the doctor I found, he specialized in anti-aging medicine. And I say this in air quotes, which meant he paid more attention to holistic things. And he ended up being hypothyroid himself. So when I went to see him, he said, well, let me see your blood work. He went, so he only looked at this and this. And did you get an ultrasound? And I said, no, but I did have to ask him for my iodine and my ferritin and my, I wanted to make all these things. Other people had told me to check. And the guy looked at me weird. And I'm like, I'm paying for this blood work. Tell me what I want to know. And he looked at me funny. I'm like, well, put it down. Like I had to force the guy to write it down. Weird. And so this doctor said, no, that's good. Okay, let's get a thyroid, an ultrasound. So that, you have a butterfly shaped gland here. One side has decreased by half size. It's gone.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. And he said, your body started eating at that probably about, when you hit puberty, your body probably started attacking your thyroid gland because it runs in your family, which it does. Every female in my family has some sort of thyroid something. And my mom included, my grandmother, both grandmothers, all of it. And he goes, yeah, so here's the fun thing. So you produce something called T4. T4 has to convert to T3. You produce very little T4. We're not concerned with TSH. You're also on birth control, which will mess with stuff. So ignore that. Whatever you produce does not convert. So some people who have okay amounts of T4 don't convert. Whatever you produce doesn't convert anyway. So you have a conversion problem. So you need T4 and T3. So he actually put me on, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called armor thyroid. It's like pig thyroid. It's
Oh,
the
yes.
compounded
Yeah, I
version.
have.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like this spark went off in my brain, and suddenly it's like I remembered who I was. I wasn't so tired, like it was like I woke up in the morning and I was so tired I couldn't turn over. I had no energy, no anything. And then I started on that and I'm back to my normal self. So
that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. So I always wonder when people say iodine, I go, I wonder if that's related, because they sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. I'm just curious on in your experience, what have you seen, especially with vocalists?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, one rule I always set myself is if I don't know an answer to something, I'm honest. I won't sort of fudge it. I haven't had a huge amount of issue dealing with thyroid issues from a nutritional perspective. I know there can be a relationship with iodine, but this patient I was telling you about, it didn't seem to be thyroid related. So yeah, I won't sort of step out of my box and pretend I know. But I'm very happy to hear that you've managed it so well.
It was amazing. Like the minute I got the tiniest little bit, it was like the spark in the back of my brain went, hello, I'm here. And I went, that's who I remember who I was. And it's like, as soon as and it was just this process of taking that dose and figuring out what I needed. And it's changed throughout the years. Like I get my blood drawn twice a year and we change it. And and for anybody who's listening, TSH doesn't play into it whatsoever, because birth control will mess with that and other things will mess with that. But the free T4 and the free T3, they it wreaks havoc. So find somebody who, I don't mean to hijack your thing.
No, it's very interesting. Yeah.
But it's, if I had not found that person, I would have been on the ringer for who knows how long. And my gosh, I mean, it's a never ending thing, because I saw that person 2 weeks ago and we're still tweaking things. Like, for example, my testosterone level was super low. And when I figured that out, it was the reason why I had super dry eye. It wasn't anything else. So we can go on this whole thing about, hormones and stuff, but it's really interesting because I know that actually nutrition can play a role in that. And if you're not getting optimal nutrition, that doesn't support your hormone levels and everything else. And I'm going to hush for now.
Okay. No, very, very interesting. Wow.
I'll go off on this huge diatribe, and this does not need to be around me. We're like, you are our guest. So I don't have any hormones, so I'm happy to talk about my lack of all day long. It's true.
That can be the next podcast.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
We'll find a hormone person, right? And I'm sure somebody would come talk to us about it.
But I've wondered about things like I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I've heard of things like, well, what can I eat for, like, if I have dry mouth, or if I have shakes, or if I'm nervous, or, is there anything that I should or should not be eating? And, people talk about bananas and stuff, but there's so much more to it than that. And I didn't want to derail you on the path you were talking about, but these are some of the things that have come up as well.
Yeah. So from a nutritional perspective, my experience is, and I would say fairly confidently that the research would justify this and back this up. We have what I call a pill or toxin bias in our nutritional culture. So by that, I mean, we're all looking for that magical pill to take, that magical thing, supplement, food to consume that'll fix all our problems. If I start taking zinc, will it fix my immune system? If I start taking tryptophan, will it help my sleep? That sort of thing. Or, if I start having aloe vera oil, is it going to make my hair and skin beautiful? We're all looking for this magic solution. Or on the opposite side of that coin, the toxin bias. What am I consuming that's causing my problems? Is it gluten? Is it meat? Is it dairy? Is it caffeine? And I think this bias, it's completely understandable. How wonderful to think that all you have to do is stop drinking caffeine, it'll fix all your problems. You know, unfortunately, it tends not to work that way, nutritionally speaking. It can work that way in terms of medications and things like that, as you just articulated. But in terms of nutrition, there's two things that are really important. Firstly, it tends to be eating patterns that either lead to the most detriment or benefit. And you may have heard that eating one healthy meal doesn't make you healthy, just like eating one unhealthy meal doesn't make you unhealthy. It's a pattern of eating that leads to health outcomes. And then secondly, the really difficult one, because our brains don't seem to work this way, particularly at the moment in our want everything yesterday culture, but these outcomes are measured in really long time frames. If you're thinking days and weeks, you're just in the wrong time spectrum. It's really measured in months, but really years and decades. Particularly when you're talking about a lot of the nutritional things that I'm dealing with and that I think are really important in current culture, in our current society, particularly in the what we call the Western world, America, Australia, UK, New Zealand. A lot of the lifestyle diseases that are really plaguing healthcare systems and really hurting populations' health and causing unfortunate levels of suffering and even death are measured in decades. Things like atherosclerosis, the buildup of deposits in the arterial walls that leads to heart attacks and strokes and so forth. This doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen in a weekend. This doesn't happen in a month. I mean, you could party for 2 months straight and you wouldn't develop atherosclerosis. But if you eat a pretty bad diet for 10 years, from the age of 25 to 35, you've probably caused some damage. So to answer your sort of what you brought up, I always begin with a pattern of eating rather than thinking, oh, if I eat bananas, will it make me less nervous? If I, because those things are the very last, not even the icing on the cake, that the frosting on the icing, the cherry on the icing of the cake, they're fine. I'm not saying they have zero value, but it's certainly, there's a huge base of the pyramid that where 95% of the benefits come from, that we tend to forget about for the very sort of slender apex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh no.
What?
I think we lost him.
Oh, he froze.
He froze. Dang it.
That's okay. We'll just wait.
We'll just wait for him to come back.
Because that's brilliant. Because he's talking about like what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the healthiest I had ever been in my life. I mean, I was when my thyroid died, I was actually on a path. So hopefully Duncan comes back and joins us in a second. But I was on a path towards a fitness competition, which may or may not have been the healthiest thing. But at the same time, I was super aware of what I was eating. I was not eating any kind of sugar and excess. I had no excess caffeine, nothing.
Yeah.
So all of that played into it. So it's really interesting that we have that compared to what we're talking about here. So it's like, here he is. He's back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, sorry guys. I heard you guys talking about me behind my back, saying I was frozen.
Sorry. You said all good things.
And then the screen shut down. I'm so sorry. At what point did we freeze?
You were talking about the narrow apex of the pyramid. So, yeah, it was like right after that.
Do you want me to repeat anything, or did you?
No, you're fine. We heard all of it.
Oh,
yeah,
great.
unless you said anything after that.
No. Nothing particularly interesting. Anyway. So in that vein, in the absence of pathology, because certain pathologies require, as we were talking about before, certain pathologies require more specific interventions, more individualized attention. You may have heard that the ketogenic diet can be very good for epilepsy in children. Or, if someone has PKU, they need a very low protein diet, things like that. Putting aside those specific pathologies, if I'm asked what is the sort of best general nutrition advice, I actually steal from the wonderful American food writer Michael Pollan, he's not a nutritionist himself. He's just extraordinarily well-researched, intelligent writer. And he has this beautiful, succinct phrase where he says, one should eat whole foods, mostly plants, and not too much. So a sort of three-pronged approach to healthy eating. And if you like, we could sort of discuss in a bit more detail what each of those elements means. But if in the absence of pathology, if one follows that advice, you've got 98% of your bases covered. You really, in terms of optimal, just day-to-day feeling, energy levels, sleep, and so forth, in terms of having your bases covered, in terms of micronutrients, macronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and so forth, in terms of disease prevention, you've got those most prevalent lifestyle diseases that I was mentioning before. If you eat in this way, you will mitigate, from at least from the nutritional perspective, against most of these. It really can be that simple. It's just can be difficult to execute in practice.
Yeah, and we see this too with at least I see this with the fitness community, if you will. The people who are really pushing, strength and wellness, but from a health perspective. Like, yeah, you can look great, but if you feel like crap, that we don't care. Like, no, you should feel good and look good, or be strong, or whatever your goals are. And what I see over and over again is that eliminate processed foods is step one. And that's certainly made me feel better. Successfully doing that, it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's easy to go grab a bag of chips, but what is that costing you compared to, say going to the produce section, right? Stuff like that, simple stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you say simple, but this is, like you say, the base of the pyramid. I think it's wonderful advice. It's actually just to your point, unfortunately, we have a fitness culture that has developed, particularly around social media. I think largely around YouTube and Instagram, where there's a promotion of an aesthetic over health, and and we just know it. And actually, I think I've seen, at least recently, a little bit more honesty and truth coming out. But if a man who gets his body fat into single digits, yeah, he might look really, really impressive and have an 8-pack and all that kind of stuff, but he's not at his fittest and strongest. You'd be much healthier in that healthy range, 12 to 18% body fat. Yes, it looks less impressive, because, well, less impressive according to the current aesthetic standards, but that's culturally defined. What's impressive is the eye of the beholder. But according to the standards of today, I would say slightly skewed standards of today, it looks impressive. But and then, of course, the whole issue of taking performance enhancing drugs to look a certain way, which obviously we know in the long term leads to, it might not kill you, but it leads to health detriment, likely leads to health detriment over time. But let's elaborate on that point. I mean, to eat whole foods, to eliminate processed foods, the first of the holy trinity, let's call it. What I always try and emphasize is it's not a purity test. We're not having a game to see who can eat the most raw, straight out of the ground, covered in dirt, sweet potatoes, just rip it out of the ground and shove it in your mouth and chew it.
Yeah.
Of course not. All of food has to exist in the context of reality, in the context of enjoyment, in the context of practicality. Food can be entertainment. We celebrate with food. We commiserate with food. It's obviously not just, we're not just looking at numbers, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats and calories. But if one can think of it as a spectrum, I find it's quite valuable. So to take just an obvious example, like a piece of fruit, obviously at the least processed end of that spectrum, you'll have the piece of fruit that you just peel and eat, or just eat, depending on what the piece of fruit is. A step away from that, one step away, might be putting that piece of fruit in a smoothie. So it goes through one level of processing. It gets whizzed up by a blender, but still maintains the majority of the nutritional content and the fiber and so forth. The next step along that spectrum might be you, instead of putting that fruit into a smoothie, you put it into a juice. So now you're removing certain elements of that food, most notably the fiber content. So this changes the way the food is reacted to in the body, because you remove that fibrous matrix. This has a different effect on your blood glucose and so forth. The next step along that continuum towards more processed might be store-bought fruit juice that is juiced and also will contain preservatives, additives, and probably some extrinsic sugars, so it's even more processed. And then the next step along that line might be some fruit-flavored candy, gummy bear or something. So, it doesn't have to be a purity test of I only eat non-processed foods, but if one stays to the least processed side of that spectrum, as much as is practical and possible, the health benefits that will flow from that, particularly in the long term, will be very significant.
Yeah.
Can I back up? But no, Jen, you had something.
No, I was just saying absolutely.
So I want to back up to what you said about enjoyment. And in the fitness world, we see, at least I see where I am right now, there is somewhat of a dichotomy between you can eat certain things and you're supposed to eat food. Food is fuel. It's not for enjoyment. That bothers me. Okay. Like just on a visceral level, it's like, no, food is also supposed to taste good. You can only eat food you hate to fuel your gains for so long, right? So have you come into that? I don't know. Have you seen that, and do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I empathize with your point. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, Angela, it's why deny oneself of one of life's greatest pleasures, to eat, life can be tough, as we've all experienced the last couple of years. Certainly, when the pandemic was on, and a lot of my pleasure in life was taken. I willingly do it because I think it was for the benefit of the population. But I certainly indulged more in food than I would normally.
Didn't we all?
I needed that sort of pleasure. But I guess like the processed to unprocessed food spectrum, it's a spectrum. If one follows the line of thought too far in one direction, you find yourself only eating boiled egg whites and raw oatmeal
and asparagus.
And a piece of asparagus steamed. Fine if that works for you, but I would say, what a shame. What a shame. I would certainly feel that way. However, of course, if one follows that line of thought to the opposite end of the spectrum and says, well, I have to enjoy, well, yes, but we know that certain eating patterns and the overconsumption of certain foods and the underconsumption of others tends to lead to very, very significant detrimental health effects in the long term. So one needs to find a place on that spectrum that works for them. And of course, it's completely in line with where you are in your life at the time, what your goals are, how important it is to you. But I would argue that the very extremes of that spectrum will always lead to some sort of problem eventually.
Yes. Yeah. So I've got two kind of questions / directions I'd like to go in, but if you guys have other thoughts, feel free to redirect.
Sure.
But I know the only thing I want to say is with whatever we've talked about, I have come into contact with people recently, and it has made me realize that things we think are commonplace and people understand, some people have no idea what a vegetable is.
Yeah.
What a
We have
vegetable.
no idea who's listening. We have
Yeah.
no idea who's listening.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a client who asked about, well, is sweet potato casserole a vegetable? What about
Okay.
if I get chicken tenders from Chick-fil-A that are breaded and fried? That's a protein, right? Like, just no. So no judgment here, but
No.
Mhm.
we haven't gone down this path before. And
Mhm.
it might not be a bad idea to just identify, like, what is a protein? What is a carbohydrate? What is a fiber? What is a blah, blah, blah. But we don't want to go too far into that. But to go on to its simplistic form, like, we're talking as people who know, who've been in this business for a long
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed when someone comes up to me and just is so clueless. And it's a lot more frequent than I realized as of lately. So
I think
that's
that's
the
a really
only
good
thing I
point.
wanted to contribute
Yeah.
as we go forward.
That's a really good point. It when one spends a whole bunch of time in a certain arena, you start to skip over things because you assume they're commonplace, but of course they might not be to everyone, and they probably aren't. I mean, if you want, I could elaborate. I talked about this trinity, eat whole foods, mostly plants, not too much. I could elaborate on the other 2 points if you like, if that's of some benefit. Shall we? Yeah.
I think that would be fair. Yeah, because now that, I mean, it ties into something that I was going to go down to, but definitely I've had people who were like, oh, I need to increase my vegetable intake, so I drank some V8 juice.
Sure.
There, exactly. Or I ate a bunch of carrots. Like, those
So maybe
are
we should talk about that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Exactly.
So the second element, so obviously first element, eat whole foods, minimally processed foods. Second element, mostly plants. Well, what does this mean? It's probably for many people the most nebulous element, the least defined element. Of course, plants in this context really means anything that isn't an animal product. Now, just off the bat, I'm not an anti-meat nutritionist. I'm not a vegan myself. I do have clients who follow a vegan diet, vegetarian diet, and it works very well when it's curated. And I do recognize there are some very good reasons that people follow those dietary patterns for non-nutritional reasons, ethical, environmental, and so forth. However, even in the context of that, it seems, when you look at epidemiological studies, big enough studies over a long enough period of time, the best healthcare outcomes are associated with populations where the bulk of their food intake is from non-animal products, which basically means anything, any fruit, any vegetable, so anything that falls off a tree or grows in the ground. But that also includes things like any sort of wheat, carbohydrates, grains, oats, quinoa, all those sorts of things, seeds and grains. And then, of course, things like nuts, peanuts, walnuts, pistachios, all that kind of stuff. So anything that doesn't come from an animal products being, of course, all the meats, fish, eggs, and then anything that comes from dairy, milk, cheese, yogurt, ice cream, and so forth. So the reason that eating a mostly plant diet or we can even call it a high plant diet is beneficial is, first and foremost, you'll likely cover all your micronutrient intake goals, calcium, vitamin C, vitamin K, all that kind of stuff. If you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, basically, you will likely have these bases covered. Second reason is your fiber intake will likely be at an appropriate level, which the more we study fiber, the more we recognize its fundamental importance to digestive health, cardiovascular health, and so forth. And there is some evidence that excess consumption of some meat products, particularly those in the processed realm, things like salamis and hams and things you'd find in the deli aisle, high levels of consumption of these type of foods, in some cases, has been associated with things like chronic levels of inflammation and the resultant diseases that flow from that: Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, certain arthritic conditions, and so forth, diabetes, and so forth. So you've got a double whammy. If you're eating a lot of stuff that's tends to only really have positive health outcomes, and you're likely mitigating against the overconsumption of certain foods that might be associated with lower with certain negative health outcomes. So that's the mostly plant aspect. Is that clear? Any questions? Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Questions on that?
I mean, it makes sense to me, and I appreciate that you emphasize the overconsumption part, because that is, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like too many carrots will turn you orange, but that doesn't make carrots bad, stuff like that. Right.
Yeah,
Yellow,
of course. Of course, underpinning in everything, I would say,
Right.
not just in nutrition, everything in life is balance. I mean, drink too much water and you get hyponatremia. Everything in balance.
Yeah.
And then finally, the third and final element is not too much. I prefer to say the right amount, not too much. For some people, can be a bit, I don't know, a bit triggering, a bit offensive.
Talking to an
perhaps.
undereater, that's not helpful either.
Yeah, actually, a very good point. Actually, yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that context, but a very good point. Not too much. It sounds a little. It's not. It's certainly not intended as accusatory, but one might experience it that way. Depending on where you are in your life. So, the right amount might be a clearer way of looking at this. But the right amount, basically, even if your diet consists of only whole foods, healthy foods, nutrient-dense foods, we know that overconsumption of calories, due to the laws of thermodynamics, over a long enough time will lead to weight gain and the potential resultant negative health effects experienced by those populations. So it's quite important to note that, medically speaking, to be overweight, or what we call obese, or type, in the UK we talk about class 1, 2, 3 obesity. I think in the US you talk about this term morbid obesity, obesity that leads to illness. I don't like that term so much, but I understand the use of it. There's nothing actually inherently wrong with it. It doesn't necessarily lead to ill health. In fact, we know, and this number is not 100% set in stone, but the number that gets bandied about 20% of even what we would call class 2 obesity, what you guys would call morbid obesity, are perfectly metabolically healthy. It has no ill effect on the metabolic health of that individual. But the other side of that equation is, we know that about 80% of class 2 obesity people do, over the course of time, experience damage to their metabolic health, which tends to lead to heart disease. In the US, obviously diabetes, which is very, very significant in the US at the moment, particularly. So it's not that, I think it's important to note that when we say, the right amount of calories, it's not a prejudice against overweight, just as there's no prejudice against being underweight. It's just that we know that once your body weight, let's say your BMI, your body mass index, or your body fat percentage, goes above or below a certain level, there tends to be an exponential increase in ill health. And particularly in the case of overweight and obesity, those ill health effects are the most prominent and destructive and deadly diseases in our society at the moment. Mm-hmm. So that's why the right amount is an important element. Overconsumption of, and of course, not just talking about overall calories to lead to weight gain or weight loss, but every food does have some sort of toxicity level. Now, I don't say that to scare you, like you say, you might turn orange if you eat too many carrots.
But I like strawberries, but strawberries can cause gout. Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. If you eat enough of them, but whoever turned orange from eating carrots, but I tend to say it has an annoyance level. If you eat too much, you get gastric upset,
Yeah.
So, but certain foods do have a toxicity level. You eat too much and you have some problems. So this is certainly the element I'm happy to admit that I struggle with the most as a huge enjoyer of food, eating the right quantity. But it's as important as the other two elements in that trinity of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many thoughts, Jen. Chime in before I go off on the deep end here. So many thoughts.
Oh, well, okay. I'll just put my thoughts out there, my two big things that I'd like to discuss, and y'all can figure out if we're going to go on from there or if we're going to go down one of Angela's rabbit holes. Maybe
It
they
might
tie
be
in.
the
I don't
same.
know. So when I was listening to you talk about this, and of course we've got our fitness background too, and we've talked multiple times about treating musicians as athletes, just in terms of the physical demand on our body, and having worked with athletes and musicians, it's always interesting in quotes, to see the mentality difference, between musicians and sports athletes, even though they're going through almost identical things. So where I was headed with that with you is, what are you seeing as the differences there? Does it compare when you were working with athletes to working with musicians? I know the needs are going to be a little different, mentality wise, need wise, stuff like that. So that's kind of question one, is the athletes versus musicians and nutrition. And the second one, actually, I'm not sure if you're going to be interested in talking about this, but you were talking about jumping continents and countries and all of that. And I know experientially and through people I talk to and just through rules and regulations, American food versus European food and Australian food, quite different. So I was wondering what you were seeing.
Share.
Yeah, between
like to
those
know.
and trying to jump. Yeah.
These are very good questions. I'd be happy to go with either or both of those. Yeah, they want. God, great questions. So
had nothing to do with my question, so this is just great. Keep going.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Have I cut?
No, not at all. Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
So no, gosh, fantastic question. So yeah, you bring up a really interesting point. This sort of difference in behavior between performing artists and athlete performers, shall we call them?
Mm-hmm.
My experience, and this is purely anecdotal. It's not based on a singular experience, but it's anecdotal to me. This isn't based on research or data. But in my experience, it really depends on where you come from culturally or just nationality. I'm from Australia, and I may have mentioned, no, I don't think I did. My mother is from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
And in both Australian and Brazilian culture, this is of course general, not universal, but there in both of those cultures, there is a relationship, what I would describe as a adult and healthy relationship with health and fitness and nutrition. I know that sounds judgmental. I didn't used to be so judgmental, but actually about this idea. But I think it's worth pointing out, when you go to Brazil, there's this idea of, why wouldn't you want to eat healthy food and be out in the sun and exercise and walk and play sport and be on the beach, all this kind of stuff. And fine, there's an aesthetic element to that in Brazilian culture. They like to look good on their bikinis and their board shorts, whatever. Fine, whatever. Nothing wrong with this. But it's this thing of like, why wouldn't you want to experience all the benefits that healthy lifestyle brings to you? And I think it's similar to that in Australia. I realize weather also helps this. Obviously, Australia and Brazil are both very warm places, and that tends to relate to a bit more of a outdoorsy, active lifestyle. But it's the same in Australia. Why wouldn't you want to just eat fresh, healthy food and go to the beach, go for a run, play sport, go surfing, go rock climbing? These things are beautiful. In the UK, and this is, I purely admit, a bit of judgment has crept into my psyche, although I love my new adopted country. There's more of what I would describe as a childish mentality, childish relationship with health and fitness. Once again, general, not universal. But what you often get is, Oh, I suppose I should go for a run today. I suppose I should drink more water. I suppose I should eat more vegetables. Sometimes it does feel like en masse, not talking to individuals, but because, people are, of course, individuals are smart, but groups of people are less smart,
Sounds like the US, honestly.
Is that, well, I was going to ask,
Yeah.
But, it reminds me of.
In parts.
Well, I was going to say my experiences with the US is what I love about American culture and Americans is this like active openness to trying things. I think this is possibly the reason like the best entrepreneurs at the moment are, coming out of the US, or the exciting companies. And there's a real, this isn't specific to nutrition or fitness, but there is a real sort of can-do attitude in Americans, which is wonderful. It's very inspiring. And so if somebody applies that to their health, then they'll get the benefits. But of course, on the flip side, in terms of health outcomes, a lot of the stuff I was talking about before is most pronounced in America. Look, the UK and Australia aren't far behind, but I think the most recent results from the CDC, for example, say that about 40,000 people in the US die every month from obesity-related illness. So, this is a pretty galling statistic. So you seem to have the two extremes in the US. But in terms of specifically mapped onto this idea of athletes versus artists, once again, in the UK, I still think there's a little bit of a stale relationship with it, where there seems to be a false dichotomy created. You can either be an athlete or you can be an aesthete. You can either be an athlete or an artist. And we sit at different tables, which of course is ridiculous. This is a new way of thinking. I mean, the samurai in ancient Japan used to also be poets and calligraphers. There was nothing, Leonardo da Vinci was a doctor and an artist. It's this idea that these things are very separate is I would say it's just objectively incorrect. I think it's a prejudice, even perhaps.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, 100%. Sorry.
I would agree with you. So yes, my experience is actually British people are more close to it. Not individual to individual, but en masse. There's a bit of a turn your nose up scoff that it seems to be the default. Fine, I'm not. If I'm honest, I'm just trying to do my thing. I'm not trying to change the world.
Hey musicians, did you know that up to 90% of musicians will experience playing-related pain or injury over the course of their career? How many hushed conversations have you heard about a lingering, quote, shoulder pain or a weird tingling in your fingers? Or maybe low back pain or a crampy weakness, or maybe you or your colleague just says, I just have to get through the gig. And you watch them pop Advil like candy, maybe flush it down with whiskey. How many times have we seen something like this? So many, right? Well, it's time we start talking about our struggles, our pain, our frustrations in a private space where we don't just complain and mobilize and blindly stretch, but we learn how to strengthen our muscles, our career successes, and build each other up. I've got a brand new program that combines all of these things, and I want you to be a part of it. It's a community, not a workout. It's a community with group coaching and great content that in 12 weeks will have you understanding more about your body, what you need, and how you work so you can avoid that career-threatening injury. The 3 things that musicians don't want. We don't want to be injured. We don't want to have a lack of stamina. And we don't want to be clueless. AKA, when you hurt, who do you go see? Just a, quote, doctor? Well, this program addresses all of those things. You're going to walk away with an immense knowledge of who to see. You're going to be empowered because you're going to know what to do should you ever get injured, or should you have a colleague that gets injured. You will be able to actually offer appropriate advice. You're also going to learn about the body and the anatomy as it relates to playing your instrument and your own anatomy. And then you're going to learn how to build not just your strength and endurance, but you're going to learn how to design your own corrective exercise program. So I hope you will join me in this new program. It's called the Music Strong Pilot Program, Job Security for Musicians.